Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to ReproAction's Act and Learn webinar for October 2018. We're incredibly excited to share this important topic with you tonight. Drug use is no excuse. Why is Wisconsin locking up pregnant women? So first, introductions to go around. As always, these webinars are hosted by the co-founders and co-directors of ReproAction. The first voice you hear is Erin Matson. I am based in Arlington, Virginia, and I am that photograph on your left.
And the second voice you hear, the photograph on your right, is me, Pamela Merritt, and I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri.
So thanks for joining us again. We're so glad you're here to join us. So a quick rundown and agenda for tonight. First, we'll introduce ReproAction, the organization that brought you this webinar tonight. Then we'll talk about how drug use is no excuse. Then we're thrilled to be joined tonight by Nancy Rosenblum, who's the Director of Legal Advocacy from our close allies and friends at the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, who's going to do a deep dive in understanding Act 292, the Wisconsin law that's being used to incarcerate pregnant women. Then we'll talk about ReproAction's Wisconsin Fights 292 campaign, and that discussion will be led by our organizer, who's actually based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Natalie Newman. We'll close out with next steps and how you can get further involved, and then do a Q&A, and we'll get to as many questions as possible at the end. For the Q&A, those will be questions that you put into the chat box. Do not feel that you need to wait until the end of the presentation to put those questions in. You can put in the questions at any point during the presentation tonight, and we'll get to as many as possible at the end. We encourage you, if you're on Twitter, we encourage you to spread the word online. The hashtag for live tweeting tonight is ReproAction. And with that, I will pass it to Pamela.
Thank you very much. So first, just a quick correction to put your questions in the question box. The GoToWebinar control panel, there's a question tab there. So drug use is no excuse. Under Act 292, Wisconsin can take certain women into custody, appoint a lawyer for her embryo or fetus, and lock the woman up in a drug treatment program, mental hospital, or jail, regardless of whether drug treatment is really needed. And Wisconsin has accused hundreds of pregnant women of unborn child abuse. What we're going to talk about today is how we got here and what ReproAction and specifically Natalie, who is our Wisconsin organizer, are doing to really alert the public and raise public awareness about this law, but also make sure that people who are vulnerable to enforcement of this law are aware that it exists and what their rights are. Drug use during pregnancy should be addressed as a health issue, not a crime. We work very hard at ReproAction not to advance stigma around drug use or drug dependency. People seeking prenatal care or other forms of health care, including drug and alcohol treatment programs, should never have to fear being arrested or having their child taken away. And pregnant and parenting women have the right to access the full range of reproductive health care services as well as non-punitive drug treatment services. National Advocates for Pregnant Women, who are our partner and funder in this effort in Wisconsin, have an awesome section of their website, advocatesforpregnantwomen.org, and it's Pregnancy and Drug Use, the Facts. It has statements from leading experts and medical professionals and a lot of really awesome articles that help us better understand the more helpful and dignified way in which to talk about drug use and drug dependency as it relates to pregnancy. So next we're going to play a video that National Advocates for Pregnant Women put together that really is kind of drives home the real impact of Wisconsin's Act 292.
It's like my mind constantly tries to find why somebody would even do this. the law itself. Where does it even come from?
There are many groups of people in the United States who have never, in fact, been recognized as full persons under the law, as full members of our constitutional community. And one of those groups is pregnant women. Tammy Lecher was a woman living in rural Wisconsin who went to get health care for a thyroid condition and for depression, and because she thought she might be pregnant.
At the time, I felt it was important to go in and get prenatal care. I was not in a good place like emotionally. I wanted to be better for myself and better for my possible child.
The hospital did a mental health screening of her. She was being honest and talked about previous drug use, not an addiction, not a substance use disorder, but some previous drug use. Somebody at the hospital reported her and accused her of unborn child abuse.
And I ended up in jail.
Wisconsin's Act 292 is the only law like it in the country. There are laws in other states that criminalize women and pregnancy, but this is the only one that in a secret proceeding in the juvenile court allows for the court to take custody, physical custody of a pregnant woman and lock her up. Under Act 292, the fetus or even the fertilized egg has to be appointed a lawyer. And the woman herself is not entitled to a lawyer at the very important early stages of the case where she can be detained against her will.
I don't understand how the state feels like locking a woman up who's pregnant and punishing them is helping them. I don't understand why they think that that's helping.
But there's no way to establish separate rights for fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses, as we see in Wisconsin, as we see under Act 292, without depriving pregnant women of virtually every right we associate with being a constitutional person. National Advocates for Pregnant Women is Tammy Lecher's lawyer in her federal case challenging the constitutionality of Act 292. We are co-counsel with the NYU Reproductive Justice Clinic and with the Perkins Coie law firm, Madison, Wisconsin office. Tammy has a very large team of lawyers and support behind her.
Reporting baby because he tested positive.
I do feel like I had some support. I feel like National Advocates for Pregnant Women, they helped tremendously, and very thankful for their help and for not just myself, they helped so many other people.
Ms. Lecher continues to be affected by what happened to her in Wisconsin, by her being prosecuted and charged with unborn child abuse. But she is soldiering on.
I'm here, and I have a beautiful son, and he's going to be 3 soon. And I'm so proud of him.
Can you name them all for me? He's smart, he's lively, and she is a terrific mother. She is so brave to take on this fight on behalf of all women in Wisconsin who have been affected by this terrible law and who might be in the future.
I'm not doing this for attention. I'm doing this so that it doesn't happen to anybody else.
Thank you so much. So it is my pleasure to introduce Nancy Rosenblum, who is Director of Legal Advocacy for National Advocates for Pregnant Women. Nancy has been a lawyer fighting for equal justice for many years. She has represented clients in civil rights, reproductive rights, family law, education law, and criminal defense matters through individual case advocacy, impact litigation, policy advocacy, and training. Nancy graduated from Brown University and Columbia University School of Law after a federal court clerkship with the Honorable UW Clement in Alabama. She served as a senior staff attorney and director of special litigation at the Legal Aid Society in New York City, director of judicial strategy at the Center for Reproductive Rights, and project director at the City Bar Justice Center before joining NAPW. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us, and I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Erin. And it's a pleasure to be here today presenting with you and with Natalie. I'm going to go through a little bit of background to try and explain how it is that we got here to where we are in Wisconsin with Act 292, and then really give you enough information to go to the next step, which is what do we do about it. Just quickly talking about National Advocates for Pregnant Women. We are an organization, national organization, primarily legal, but we also do organizing and documenting terrible things that are happening related to pregnancy, and a lot of public education, really challenging the legal and political and cultural underpinnings of essentially the targeting and punishment of women in relationship to pregnancy or the capacity for pregnancy. So let's go to the next slide. You'll see our mission. And we've got all kinds of things happening in this country, which many people don't know about, including criminal prosecution and other civil interventions, like what's going on in Wisconsin, that feel a lot like criminal prosecution to the people who are the subjects of them. And these are happening in these different areas that you see. Women who have a pregnancy loss, women who are alleged to have used drugs, people who have abortions outside of medical setting, people who pretty much do or don't do anything during pregnancy that some government actor thinks is wrong. People who give birth to healthy babies yet are accused of having done something wrong. And we see this in the form of criminal prosecutions. We see civil child abuse and neglect prosecutions based on something someone did or didn't do during pregnancy. And what we're really talking about is, in the case of crimes, things that would not be a crime except for the fact that someone was pregnant. For example, in almost every state in the country, it's not a crime simply to use drugs. Your own use is not a crime. But suddenly, if someone is pregnant, there's this idea that she's committed a criminal act by using a substance, whether it's a prescription, whether it causes any potential risk of harm or not to a baby. So just for a little bit of context, about 6 million people become pregnant every year in the United States. About 4 million continue to term. About 1 million experience a pregnancy loss, and about 1 million terminate those pregnancies with abortion. Another important thing to know when we're talking about pregnant women is that it's all the same people who have abortions, who become singled out for interventions, and people who are mothers. When we're thinking about abortion, about more than 60% of women who have abortions are already mothers. So it's not just about, this abstract right to abortion that we're fighting for. You just can't separate that right from the person, right? So we at NAPW view what's going on here as the criminalization and retribution and punishment against women, against people with the capacity for pregnancy. So let's go to the next slide. And you'll see some of the charges and interventions in the United States. And our litigation and legal advocacy focuses on cases, as I said, in which being pregnant is really an element of the crime charged. So that if someone had not been pregnant, their conduct or circumstances or health outcomes would never have been investigated or punished. But because someone is pregnant, sometimes people think it's different. And you'll see all these different crimes where we've defended or helped defend people charged with crimes only related to pregnancy. Today, we're going to be talking about drug allegations because that's what's going on in Wisconsin, but all of these things are happening around the United States. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the concept. It's really that the people who are against abortion say that fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses have separate rights, that they're separate people somehow with separate rights. But what we see is that you can't add that kind of personhood to the fetus without taking away the full personhood and dignity and human rights of the person who's pregnant. So on to the next slide. We wonder how we got here. And I'm going to give you a little context. Next slide, please. Since the war on drugs in the United States began, which is really a war on people who use drugs, this was the early 1980s, we officially declared a war on drugs. And look what happened to the women's incarceration rate. You'll see the slide, and women now comprise a larger proportion of the prison population than ever before. If we look at the next slide, you'll see some of the detail about this, and that really there's been a change in the criminal legal system, that there were not as many women prosecuted or jailed. And this is all part of mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex, so that it's far more likely today than in the 1970s or than in 1973 when Roe versus Wade came about. It's far more likely that if abortion is criminalized again, that the women who have abortions will be arrested and put behind bars. It's all part of this same trend of more incarceration. In the old days, it was thought, well, maybe, we don't want to, the anti-abortion people say it's not about punishing the women, it's about punishing the people who do the abortions. That's simply not true anymore. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see that we've documented more than 1,200 arrests around the country already since Roe of women, either very few specifically for abortion, but it's the same thinking that says if the fetus is the person, therefore abortion is bad, then the government can take control and punish a woman who is pregnant, whether the baby is born, whether there's an abortion, for any type of conduct. And those are the 1,200 arrests that we've documented and that we see continuing. So if we go on to the next slide, in the category of drug use, we see prosecutions for drug use, including people who are on medication-assisted treatment. So you'll see on the left, this is a picture of a woman we have worked with, and everyone has given consent to use their pictures who are in these slides. This is Casey Shihai. She's a woman in Alabama who was one of the more than 600 people who've been prosecuted in Alabama under a law that was supposed to keep people from bringing their children to dangerous places like methamphetamine labs that might explode. It's called chemical endangerment of a child. And some clever prosecutors decided, we don't like pregnant women using drugs. Let's see if we can prosecute women for this crime who are using drugs during pregnancy, with no proof at all that the medication or the criminalized drug or the alcohol or the marijuana has caused any harm to the fetus. And oftentimes these drugs do not cause any specific harms, believe it or not. So in Alabama, they had a theory that chemical endangerment of a child, that, well, if a fetus is a child and a uterus is a dangerous environment, maybe we can prosecute people for this. And it worked. And unfortunately, despite the fact that many of us fought hard all the way up to the state's highest court in Alabama, the Alabama court said it's okay to do that because we're about protecting the fetus. So we're going to lock up the mother. The woman on the right is Jennifer Johnson. She's a woman who used to live in Florida. And more than 25 years ago, she gave birth to a baby whose umbilical cord tested positive for a criminalized substance. No proof that the baby was harmed. And she was prosecuted and convicted of a felony for delivery of a controlled substance to a minor through the umbilical cord. So here you see this creative use of criminal laws and other laws to target and single out pregnant women in a way that is completely counterproductive, according to every major medical and public health group. If we go to the next slide, you'll see two of the women in Wisconsin who have been subjected to Act 292, what's called the Unborn Child Protection Act in Wisconsin. And again, you see just by the name, unborn child, what's, as you saw in the film, when I was more dressed up than I am now, and I was talking about the act, it is a law that is unique in the country. It says, just like a regular sort of proceeding about where someone's accused of abusing or neglecting a child, this is unborn child abuse. And it's a very ill-defined law that says that the child welfare court can take custody of an adult, can take custody of the pregnant woman, like Alicia Beltran, who you see on the left, or Tammy Lecher, who you see on the right with the blonde hair, who any pregnant woman who is alleged to be using alcohol or drugs. So again, what's happened here is that there are these secret proceedings going on under Act 292. They're secret because they're in the children's court, which is normally about safeguarding the privacy of children. Yet here you've got these proceedings that say a county in Wisconsin, a social services department, or a law enforcement official can actually take a woman into custody, force her into treatment, force her to stay at home, home confinement, can require a woman to go into a hospital or do all kinds of things with the woman not even having legal representation, no right to a lawyer at the very important early stages of the case, to essentially try and force her into treatment. And unfortunately, this law not only is counterproductive and horrible, but it's not based on any kind of evidence. The women, as happened to Ms. Beltran on the left and Ms. Lecher on the right, they were both taken into custody for acknowledging past drug use. Ms. Beltran had, proudly said that she had a former drug problem and she had recovered from it. And because of that, she was reported to social services and she was locked up in a drug treatment facility that she did not even need for 78 days while she was pregnant, until we were able to help get her out through a federal court proceeding. Ms. Lecher, as you saw in the film, went in to apply for Badger Care, to apply for Wisconsin's Medicaid, because she had severe hypothyroidism. Didn't even think she could get pregnant, but thought she was pregnant. She went in to get help, and while she was in the hospital, even though her doctors felt she was fine to go home and had a plan and was all set, one of the social workers in the hospital decided to call in a report of unborn child abuse, just because she had acknowledged this past drug use, with no evidence that she would continue now that she knew she was pregnant. She did not have a diagnosed substance use disorder. That is not needed for this law. It's simply based on an allegation without any expert evaluation. So it's very frightening. And what happened to Tammy Lecher is that she said to the court, I don't have a drug problem. I'm not using drugs. I care about my pregnancy and I'm going to be healthy. I don't think I need to go to this drug treatment facility that you're trying to force me into. And the court said, Well, you have a choice. You can go there for the duration of your pregnancy and be in this residential, away from home drug treatment facility where you cannot leave, or I can hold you in contempt and send you to jail for 30 days. She picked the shorter one because she wanted to be home with her family. And the shorter one was going to jail for 30 days. So when NAPW became aware of the case, we put together a team. We were able to get her released through court proceedings, and she became the plaintiff who challenged this law, got a constitutional challenge to the law in federal court. And we were successful in that challenge. After a couple years, we were able to document that more than 3,000 women have been accused in Wisconsin of unborn child abuse under Act 292. We were able to show with expert testimony and reports from doctors and other clinicians that it is healthcare that is helpful to mothers and babies, not punishment. And we were able to show that the law is so vague, so unspecific, that there is no way that it can be enforced in a way that gives people due process of law. And the federal court struck down the law, said it's unconstitutional, we're striking down the law, it's no longer in effect. Unfortunately, Wisconsin's Governor Scott Walker and the Attorney General Brett Schimmel appealed the case. We had a long appeal process, and the appeals court didn't say the law is okay, didn't say the law is constitutional, but said, we're throwing this case out, we're reversing the ruling because the particular woman who brought the challenge this time is no longer living in Wisconsin. So they punted, they didn't make a decision on the substance, but the effect was that the law is back in effect now, and we will challenge it again in court, but we also need to organize and to do everything we can legislatively to get this law off the books. It's very dangerous. So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes on some of the context and where this law came from. If you look at the next slide, it's really, this law came from this scare in the 80s, really, about crack babies. This mythology that cocaine use during pregnancy, a specific form of cocaine that was primarily used by poor people, people of color who used the drug, there was this mythology that the use of cocaine was going to cause this irreparable damage to babies of women who were pregnant while they used crack cocaine. That turned out not to be true scientifically and medically, but there was a scare about this is what these crack babies are going to be. It led to a lot of arrests. It led to a lot of terrible consequences. And this Act 292 in Wisconsin came through the legislature much later, actually, after we all knew the crack baby scare was a myth. But it came through on that theory. It was called the Cocaine Mom Law, and it was about protecting fetuses. And the people who lobbied for the law were the anti-abortion lobbyists. So it really goes back to this thinking. If you look at the next slide, you'll see some of the coverage in the media about our challenge to this law. And on the right, you'll see a friend of the court brief that was filed by a whole slew of all the major medical and public health groups, really saying this law, Act 292, singling out of pregnant women who are alleged to use drugs or alcohol, is based on junk science. It's based on mythology, that there are no studies that show that using any amount of any drug necessarily means someone's a bad parent. On the next slide, you'll see all of the groups who have issued statements, public statements and policies from groups, the groups who care about people, the groups who care about children, the Academy of Pediatrics, for example, saying punishment, criminal prosecution is going to deter people from getting health care, and it is bad for the moms and bad for the babies. So I have a couple of more slides on the junk science aspect. If you go to the next one, you'll see that several years later, after this whole horrible upheaval and incarceration of thousands of people on this theory that cocaine was uniquely dangerous during pregnancy, you'll see that even the federal government came out, published things saying, "Oops, turns out that really was a big overstatement. It doesn't really have those kind of effects." If you look at the next slide, it just is happening. So next it was methamphetamine and the same type of mythology about exposure during pregnancy being somehow uniquely dangerous to the fetus. Turns out not to be true. So next slide, we have a little bit of information about the stigma and the way in which the media and some popular media have really fueled these myths about drug use in pregnancy, talking about, for example, drug-addicted newborns. Newborns cannot be drug-addicted. Newborns can have temporary withdrawal symptoms, but an addiction is a behavioral disorder. It's drug-seeking behavior that's not controlled. It's a compulsive behavior. Newborn babies are not addicted to crack or to opioids or anything else. Very important to always, whenever you're out there talking about drug use is not the same as drug abuse. It's not the same as addiction or substance use disorder. There's a big difference. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that now in the era of the opioid epidemic and opioid overdose epidemic, that here it is, our federal government again, even saying that the appropriate treatment for pregnant women who do have an opioid use disorder is methadone or buprenorphine. It's the medication-assisted treatment during pregnancy. It's the recommended treatment. And what happens when people are seeking that treatment during pregnancy is that babies may be born with temporary and treatable withdrawal symptoms, but still it is the medically recommended treatment. If we go to the next slide, I'm just going to barrage you with a little bit of information about how many people who do have substance use disorders who want treatment still cannot get it in our country. There's a big gap in treatment. Many people don't have coverage. And let's go to the next slide, and you'll see that with the Threats to the Affordable Care Act, and especially there being a lot of programs not accepting pregnant women or postpartum women, it's very hard to get treatment even when people want it. So the idea of punishing people who have a use disorder, who are not causing a unique harm to babies, and who can't get treatment even if they want it, you see what's wrong with that. If you go to the next slide, we're listing just some of the barriers to treatment that people face during pregnancy. There's that mythology, there's the stigma, there's the fear of prosecution, like under Act 292, there's the fear of child abuse charges. And then you see that there's severely limited services available. So the next slide shows you that there's some information out there about treatment, but there's not much attention being paid to the consequences of seeking help, which can sometimes mean a report to Child Protective Services, or in Wisconsin, a report even while someone is pregnant of unborn child abuse under Act 292. My last slide asks you some questions. What can we do about Act 292? Certainly we'll be back in the courts. Legislative reform is possible. This is a law created by the legislature. Public education, absolutely important. Education of medical providers, of social workers, of the people who tend to call in these reports, oftentimes thinking they're being helpful, but they're not. The consequences are absolutely severe. We can organize and we can do direct action. And with that, I think we are ready for our next segment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We really appreciate that incredible information and background on Act 292. And next up, it is our Wisconsin organizer, Natalie Newman. Natalie.
Hi, and thank you so much for attending this webinar. My name is Natalie, and I'm the Wisconsin organizer for Repro Action. I'll be talking about our Wisconsin Fights 292 campaign. So as you know, Wisconsin Unborn Child Protection Act, also known as the Cocaine Mom Law, or Act 292, is dangerous for pregnant people and harms Wisconsin communities. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see just some stats about Wisconsin. Wisconsin's population is 5.795 million people. Its largest city is Milwaukee, and the capital is Madison. It is home to the Green Bay Packers, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Milwaukee Brewers. It is known as America's Dairyland, and it is known for cheese, beer, and very harsh temperatures in the winter. So you can go to the next slide, please. So the results of continued enforcement of Act 292, parents and expecting mothers are punished for drug use disorders. We know that all people, including pregnant people, deserve appropriate, confidential health care. And pregnant people lose rights to medical decision-making, privacy, and liberty when Act 292 is enforced. Expectant mothers and pregnant people seeking prenatal care and drug treatment may fear being arrested or having their children taken away. We know that expectant mothers and pregnant people deserve better. Next slide. So the Wisconsin Fights 292 campaign aims to educate communities about and stop enforcement of the Unborn Child Protection Act. It was developed in partnership with our friends, National Advocates for Pregnant Women, and we aim to inform, educate, and empower pregnant people in Wisconsin by alerting those most vulnerable to the law and raising public awareness in order to build capacity. In this campaign, we have a focus on community engagement and direct action through webinars, educational forums, informational pickets, and more. If you want to get involved, please reach out to ReproAction at reproaction.org. And then I'll be talking a little bit about informational pickets. We hand out these half sheets at informational pickets. They say, "Are you pregnant? Your rights and health are at stake." Next slide. So informational pickets are direct actions that take place outside of businesses, workplaces, and more to draw attention to a cause. We take action outside of ER waiting rooms, drug treatment centers, prenatal care providers, and highly populated areas such as coffee shops and more. We do this to educate those most vulnerable to the enforcement of Act 292 on the issue and to educate the general public about Act 292. We typically stand outside for about 30 minutes to an hour, and the response we get is typically shock, confusion, anger, and even fear. I've gotten a lot of personal stories from this informational picket, so that's really awesome to hear that people are aware of the law and that they're willing to talk to me about it. Next slide. So if you want to get involved in the Wisconsin Fights 292 campaign, you can spread the word by going to our campaign page at the top. You can share your story at reproaction.org. You can sign our petition via Action Network. I pledge to fight back against Act 292. You can get direct messages or direct emails when direct actions are happening in your area. If you're interested in having me speak to your group or organization about the issue, please email reproaction@reproaction.org. And have you been accused under the Unborn Child Protection Act and need legal advice? Please go to www.advocatesforpregnantwomen.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you to Nancy again for that fantastic presentation as well, and thank you, Pamela. So the next step, we also want to encourage you, as always, to plug into Repro Action's work. Repro Action is a direct action organization formed to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. If you sign up for our email alerts at www.reproaction.org, you won't miss a thing. In fact, we run these Act and Learn webinars every single month, and they're free and they're open to the public. And the easiest way to never miss an invitation is to sign up for our email list and to be aware of actions that you can join in, petitions you can sign, and learn lots of important information about the reproductive justice movement. We encourage you to follow us on social media. We are Repro Action on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we look forward to interacting with you there as well. And we'd like to encourage you to save the date for our next Repro Action Act and Learn webinar. I'm very excited about it. It will take place on Tuesday, November 27th. It will be from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. And our topic next month is going to be progressive parenting, which is something that's near and dear to my heart as a progressive parent myself. And with that, I will pass it back to Pamela to close us out with Q&A.
Thank you so much, Erin. So if you do have a question, please go to the GoToWebinar control panel and you can type in your question there and I will ask it of our wonderful panelists. So please just drop it in there. And I do actually have a question for Nancy while we wait to see if any of the attendees have questions as well. Nancy, I was curious about if you could expand a little bit more about people who don't live in Wisconsin and might be thinking that this is something that they just can't imagine happening in their state. If you could just talk just a little bit more about the work that NAPW does around this issue and other issues and kind of what people can look out for or how they can be better advocates or more aware of what is happening to people who are pregnant in their state.
Sure, absolutely. I said earlier that the Wisconsin law is unique, and it's only unique because it is the only law in the country that uses the child welfare system to make a special form of intervention for people who are pregnant, for so-called unborn children. But the same exact thinking underlies the criminalization that we're seeing and other types of civil commitment laws in states around the country. And those 1,200 arrests and detentions that we've documented are not just in states you might think of as scary states either. We have cases in New York, we have cases in California, we have cases all over the country. So be aware. The way to be aware of it is when you're reading wherever you get your news from or listening to it, listen for the word pregnant, because you will see and hear things that might just normally slide by. Oh, somebody was arrested for drug possession, or somebody was arrested for assault. But when you hear that the woman was pregnant and she's been arrested for assault allegedly of her own fetus, or that she's been arrested for not just drug possession, but drug use, which somebody thought meant she was endangering her fetus or committing an assault. Or someone who we've had about 8 cases around the country of women who, because they don't have access to abortion, have gotten abortion medication online and had a self-induced abortion and were accused of something including the crimes of murder and assault on a fetus and things like that. Tennessee had a law that was in effect for 2 years, which the reproductive justice movement successfully got off the books. But that law was specifically a law that legislators decided to pass with the goal, they said, of helping people, called fetal assault on a fetus. And that really meant that people who were pregnant, if they were accused of drug use and even doing something else that somebody thought might be dangerous to a pregnancy, could be prosecuted and were prosecuted. So this kind of thing is happening everywhere. It stems from this same thinking that underlies people who don't like abortion. Right now in Alabama, just to say one more thing, there's a ballot measure that is in effect a personhood measure. It would amend the state constitution to say no protection for abortion, but it also would make every public official in Alabama responsible, as the policy of the state, for protecting unborn life. And what that could mean is it would open many more women to prosecution for doing things during pregnancy. So it's happening all around us, and we tend not to know about it. But if you listen for the word pregnant or pregnancy, you'll see this everywhere, all around the country.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And I can personally vouch for that advice because before I was aware of NAPW's work and this issue, among other issues that impact women who experience pregnancy, I was completely unaware that this was happening. And then after watching some webinars and attending a conference and learning more, it just jumps out at you and you realize just how often you took for granted or accepted the myth rather than kind of challenging the stereotypes and stigma. So thank you for that advice, Nancy. Erin, did you have a question as well?
I did. So Nancy, what we've been going, I've been rapidly tweeting much of tonight's presentation, and there's been a whole other incarnation of this webinar that's been happening online under the ReproAction hashtag. And in particular, on the topic of, you had highlighted earlier in your presentation, one of the things that pregnant people are already experiencing in the United States in terms of interventions and charges. And in specific, someone asked a question online about forced medical interventions. And I'd love if you could tell our audience here some examples of the forced medical interventions that are happening and being forced upon pregnant women in the United States already.
Yes, absolutely. And that is work that we do as well. What we're talking about with forced medical interventions is medical interventions during the birth process. So again, this is not reproductive justice, is not just about abortion, it's about people. And people who are pregnant sometimes give birth and sometimes they don't. So sometimes there's pregnancy loss, sometimes there's abortion. It's all the same people. So we've found increasingly as cesarean surgery becomes more common in the United States, and in fact, the United States has a much higher rate of cesarean surgery for birth than international human rights organizations recommend, that people are being coerced and sometimes forced into cesarean surgery when they would rather give birth vaginally. So there's that, and there are other interventions during labor and delivery that people don't want. People have rights during their birth. And just like you have a right to refuse any other medical intervention, you also have a right to refuse a surgery that you feel is unnecessary during birth. So again, it's the fact of pregnancy that some government actors or hospitals or doctors may think make it okay to invade your bodily autonomy in the name of helping the fetus. And we do see these cases. I'm talking about cesarean surgery because it's the most common, I believe, and because it's major abdominal surgery. It's not something that carries no risk. And many women would like to continue in labor, but feel pressured or forced, even without anybody saying there's, medical emergency or anything. People feel forced and sometimes have been coerced against their will. And it's been documented that this woman is refusing cesarean surgery, that the doctor recommends it. And they, we've had cases where people have been literally strapped down and wheeled into surgery against their will. The important thing to know about these forced medical interventions, in addition to the fact that people do have rights to refuse, is that it's very hard to get redress. It's hard to win a lawsuit about something like that, because oftentimes, a court would look at it and say, well, there's a healthy baby. What's the injury? Right? And the injury is to the person's rights, to the person's body. It's a bodily invasion that the person didn't consent to. So this is happening. There's an organization called the Birth Rights Bar Association. That's a bunch of lawyers who around the country who advise and sometimes work on these cases. But it's really quite a disturbing trend in our country. And again, goes back to that same thinking that somehow women lose their rights, are a special class of people who can be treated as less than full constitutional people during pregnancy.
Thank you for that, Nancy.
That is just shocking. Thank you, Nancy. So I'm not seeing any questions, and I'm just going to give it another second just to see if anybody pops up with one. And of course, you can always reach out to us if you have questions after this webinar at reproaction@reproaction.org. But seeing no questions, I would like to take this moment to thank Natalie Newman, who is our Wisconsin organizer, for pulling together this wonderful webinar. Also thank Nancy Rosenblum of National Advocates for Pregnant Women for this wonderful in-depth breakdown of how we got here with Wisconsin's Act 292 and also ways that we can fight back. And we are so proud to be partnered with NAPW in this work. And also I would like to thank my co-director, Erin Matson, for driving this ship and always keeping everything together. You can reach out to ReproAction again at ReproAction at reproaction.org. Our website is reproaction.org, and we are also ReproAction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.